In this video, we're going to show you the process of installing the Farmer's Friend Gothic Caterpillar tunnels. We're going to show the process for our 14 and 16 foot wide tunnels, and also the 4 and 5 foot bow spacing. We'll also show the differences between the standard and the Gothic Pro models. So let's get started. When your pallet shows up, the first thing you're going to want to do is identify all the different parts and reference that with your packing guide and your manual to make sure that everything arrived in good condition and you're ready to start building your tunnel. So we've laid everything out here. We're going to do an overview. You're going to have your roll of plastic. We have this in a box here. We have a kit box, and that box has all of the hardware, brackets, nuts and bolts, screws, etc. Then we have our wind bracing, our center Purlin pipe, our single channel and spring wire. We have our rebar, a roll of rope, our side bow sections, and our center bow sections. And then if you've purchased a Gothic Pro tunnel, you will also have crossbars and lift kit height extensions. To complete this installation, you're going to need a couple of ladders, a sledgehammer for driving rebar, or if you want to rent or you have a jackhammer, you can purchase the driver from us and you can drive all your rebar really easily with the jackhammer. You'll also need a level. We have a 4 foot, shorter one could work if you don't have a long one. We also have an impact driver for driving all of our screws and tightening nuts and bolts. 300 foot tape measure. It just needs to be long enough to go the length of your tunnel, so it doesn't have to be 300. A smaller tape measure for measuring the width. We have a utility knife, wire cutters, a Sharpie, safety glasses, 14 millimeter deep well socket and 1/2 inch deep well socket, a couple of pairs of pliers, and tin snips. You want to pick a nice flat spot for your tunnel. So we're going to be building right here. Now with Caterpillar tunnels, they can be installed on ground that's not perfectly flat and level. They can kind of roll with the contours of the ground a little bit better than something like our Haven tunnel or the Guardians. So you can keep that in mind, but as flat as possible is ideal. And so we're going to be putting our front left corner post right here. We're going to be driving the rebar until there's about 12 inches out of the ground. And so you can either get somebody to hold this for you if they trust you, or you can get it started by holding it with one hand and driving with the other. Once it's secure a little bit, then you can drive it more forcefully. Now we're going to run our tape measure down the length of the tunnel and install our back left rebar. We're going to be using our tape measure laid out down the length of the tunnel as our straight line, and then obviously the indication of where the rest of the rebar goes. You can also take a string line and run it from one rebar to the other just to get all of them in a nice straight line. But on the Caterpillar tunnels, it's not super critical that they're perfect. So we're just going to be using the tape measure. And at this point, you would be putting them at 4 foot on center or 5 foot on center, depending on which bow spacing you purchase with your tunnel. For this tunnel, we're on 5 foot centers, and we're going to be going down the length of the tunnel. Now we're installing our front right rebar, and this is a 16 foot wide tunnel, so we've measured 16 feet over from the other side, and we also have our diagonal measurement laid out here, which is going from the back left rebar to the front right rebar. And for our 20 foot tunnel, that measurement is 25'7", and so that's going to keep this tunnel nice and square. Next, we're installing the back right rebar, and we're measuring 16 feet over from the other side of the tunnel and down 20. Since we already kind of squared the tunnel with the diagonal measurement on the front right corner post, we are not needing to do any diagonal in this case. We're just going 16 and 20, and we'll drive this rebar right at that intersection. To finish the rebar step, you're going to drive the rest of the rebar down the right side of your tunnel at 4 foot spacing or 5 foot spacing, depending on which bow spacing you purchased. The next step is to install your anchor plates. Your four corners, you're gonna have this earth lock anchor plate, which is larger with this bent up tab, but it functions similarly. We're gonna be installing the easy clip through the smaller hole here on the edge of the plate, and we just have to rotate that until it clips on, and the small radius here is through that hole. And then we're gonna be sliding it over the rebar going through the hole in the center of the plate. And then this bent up tab you want facing towards the inside of your tunnel. Then we'll put that all the way down on the ground. The rest of the rebar are using these smaller square anchor plates, but the easy clip also goes through the small hole, and again, rotate it around until it hangs like that. And then we'll put it over the rebar through the big hole. And your easy clip, we always want on the outside of the tunnel because that's where your ropes go through to secure your plastic down. So we'll do this on the rest of the rebar on the other side as well. The next step is bow assembly, and for this you want to try to find a nice flat surface. The flatter it is, the straighter your bows will end up, because if these joints get twisted, then your bows will start to look a little crooked. So we want to find that nice flat surface, and then we're taking our side bow sections, two side bow sections, and our Gothic center peak, and we're just sliding these joints together and taking our self-tapping screws and going through the joint. We want to go through the side, and if anything, rotate down towards the bottom side of the bow, because we want to stay clear of where the plastic is going to be on the top side of the bow. And we're putting two screws in, so we're going to do our first one about 1/2 inch below the joint, and then once we get that in, we'll put our second screw about 1.5 inch gap between the two of them. The overlap in our swage joint here is 3 inches, so we want one about 1/2 inch from the top of the joint and one about 1/2 inch in from the bottom of that joint, giving a nice secure joint here. Now we'll do the same thing on the other side of the bow. Once you get all of the bows assembled to this point, you want to install your side curtain hooks. And for this 20-foot tunnel, we just have 2 of those. Your kit may have 6 or 8 or 4. Whatever you have, it's divisible by 2, so that number is how many bows you would be installing this on. So 4 side curtain hooks would be installed on 2 bows, etc. So you take this and we slide it over the base of the bow. I'm just going to get it up a couple feet and rotate it around so it's towards the inside of the tunnel. We install one on either side. If you purchased a Gothic Pro tunnel or the lift kit extensions as an upgrade to your tunnel, now's the time to install those. So we're going to slide these in the base of the bow, and then same process as our bow joints, we're going to do 2 screws in the joint. The next step is to install the crossbars on your bows. This option only comes with our Gothic Pro kits, so if you do not have a Gothic Pro, you can skip this step. First, we want to make sure that the base of the bow is set at the width of your tunnel, either 14 or 16 foot. So we have taken our bow and placed it between the 2 rebar at the end of our tunnel, and that is making sure that our bow is at that 16-foot measurement. We want to make sure it stays there while we install this crossbar so that the bow doesn't end up kind of more in a fixed position, bowed out or in. We're going to take 2 pairs of pliers and open up the band clamp to where we can slide it over the bow. And then we'll use our pliers to squeeze it back together. Now we're going to take our bolt and we're going to put it through the band clamp, through the crossbar from the bottom up. Sometimes you have to wiggle this around a little bit to get it all to line up and get through. Now we're going to just hand tighten this nut down. We don't want to tighten this up yet. Now we're going to do the same step on the other side. Before we tighten down the band clamps on both ends of the crossbar, we want to make sure that it's centered in the peak of the bow. So what we're going to do is take our tape measure. We're going to use our joint as a reference, and from my joint up to the base of the band clamp, I have 4 inches here. Now we're going to measure the other side. We're at 5.5 inches here. So we're just going to shimmy this back and forth until our measurements are about equal on both sides. On this tunnel, I have 5 inches up from the joint to the bottom of the band clamp on both sides. So we're going to go ahead and tighten them down. Also, once you get that measurement for your first bow, the rest of your bows are probably going to be about the same. Now you'll repeat the same process on all the rest of the bows, except for 2 bows, which are your end bows that do not have crossbars. Now for the exciting part, it's time to install our bows. If you're doing a Gothic Pro tunnel, you'll have crossbars on some bows. The first bow we put in will not have a crossbar, and we want to make sure that screw heads are facing towards the inside of the tunnel so they don't puncture the end wall plastic. So our first bow is going to go on the far end of the tunnel. If you're installing a Gothic Pro tunnel, the rest of your inner bows will have crossbars, and then your front bow will again not have a crossbar. The other thing we need to pay attention to at this point is the position of the bows that have your side curtain hooks. So there's a chart in the manual that shows for all the lengths of tunnels where those side curtain hooks need to land. So reference that and just make sure that the bows where you installed the side curtain hooks end up in those locations. Otherwise, we're just going to finish installing the bows and move on to the next step. Next step is to install our front wind bracing. We're starting at our 3rd bow, and we're at the base of the bow. We need to open up our brace bands and slide that over the bow. Now we'll use our pliers to squeeze it back together. And we'll take a bolt. We want to make sure the bolt goes through from the outside of the tunnel towards the inside so that the bolt doesn't puncture the plastic. And then we'll thread on a nut. And we want this one to be a couple inches up off of the anchor plate. And then we'll go ahead and tighten it down. Now we'll go back to our 2nd bow. And we have 2 band clamps that need to be going over this bow. Now we'll slide these up and we'll find the natural connecting point of the wind brace and put the bolt through from the outside towards the inside. We're going to go ahead and finger tighten a nut onto the inside of the bolt. And before we tighten that down, we want to take our level and plumb up this bow. So we can slide it side to side to get it plumb and adjust the wind brace up and down till the bubble is right in the middle. Now we'll tighten down the wind brace. Now the 2nd wind brace is just repeating the same process. We'll go ahead and install this end and get it tight, and then find that natural connecting point on our end bow and plumb it up, and then tighten down the brace band, and then repeat the same process on the other side of the tunnel. The next step is to assemble the center purlin. We're going to do this on the ground, so we've laid out our purlin pipes down the middle of the tunnel, and we're going to slide these joints together and use a single self-tapping screw in the middle of the joint. All of the purlin pipes have a swage on the end except for one piece, which you'll use to terminate your purlin. When you screw these joints together, you want to make sure that all of your screws end up on the same side of the pipe. So before we put this next one in, we'll go back and make sure that the other screw is facing up. This tunnel is a short 20-foot tunnel, so we just have 3 purlin pipe sections. So we're going to slide it up above our crossbars, and it'll rest there while we install it. But if you're doing a longer tunnel, and especially if you don't have crossbars, you may want to assemble your purlin in smaller sections of 3 pipe. and get it installed, and then do the next section of 3. If you try to do it all in one long, let's say 100-foot section, it's going to be challenging unless you have 3 or 4 people to help with that process. Now we're going to take our tape measure and we're going to run down the length of the purlin, marking for the center of each bow. Now this would be either 4-foot or 5-foot spacing depending on which tunnel you purchased. We're doing 5-foot spacing, so I'm going to come down and put a Sharpie mark, 5-foot, 10-foot, 15, etc. We want to do this on the same side of the pipe that our screws are on. And the reason for that is we're rotating the pipe so where the screws are going to be facing down once we're installing it, and then our marks will be visible from the bottom. Lastly, we're going to put the finishing caps in the end of the purlin pipes. Now we're going to take our purlin pipe and we're going to slide it up above our crossbars. And again, this is just a small tunnel, so this is easy to handle. But if you're doing a long tunnel, you'll want to do this in multiple sections. Next, we're going to install the tube strap at the end bow here to start the purlin installation. We're going to be drilling self-tapping screws over our head, so it's a great idea to wear safety glasses. We're going to put this tube strap right in the center of the peak of the Gothic bow here. And then we're going to put one self-tapping screw in the side of the tube strap. We're not going to tighten up that band clamp right now because we need to be able to get the purlin pipe through there. So now we're going to slide the purlin pipe through that band clamp, and we want to make sure the end of the purlin is flush with the bow here. And then before we tighten it down, we need to rotate the purlin to make sure that the heads of our self-tapping screws are facing down at the joints. Once we get all that lined up, we're going to go ahead and tighten this down. On the rest of the inner bows, we're going to be using cross connectors to attach the purlin to the bow. And we're going to put the 2 halves of the cross connector over the top of the bow. And then you use the golden nuts and bolts to tighten this up. Once we get this installed with the 2 halves and the bolts and nuts, you're going to shift the bow side to side until the center of your bow lines up with the black Sharpie mark that we made on the purlin. You'll also want to shift the purlin side to side this way to make sure that it's right in the center of your peak. Now you'll repeat that down the length of the tunnel and finish on the end bow with another tube strap. The next step is the backside wind bracing. We're going to be repeating the same processes that we did on the front wind bracing. On this short tunnel, the wind bracing is actually going to meet in the middle. So we'll just install the brace band right above the other brace band and then go to the second bow and to the first bow. And you'll repeat on the other side of the tunnel. The next step is to secure the earth lock anchor plate system to the bow on our 4 corners of the tunnel. We're going to take a band clamp and we're going to open it up and slide it over the bow. And then we'll use our pliers to pinch it back together. Now we'll take the carriage bolt and we're going to slide it through the band clamp, through this slot and tab here on the earth lock anchor plate. And you may have to wiggle this around a little bit. My bolt's not going in there, so I'm going to try to pull my bow a little bit closer. You can try to push the anchor plate this way, try to pull the bow that way, and get it lined up. Now you want to put this bolt in from the outside of the tunnel towards the inside so that the end of the bolt isn't puncturing your plastic. If need be, you can also take a hammer and try to tap that in to get it to go through. Once we get that through, we're going to put the nut on the end of the bolt and then tighten this all the way down. Now we're going to take a self-tapping screw and we're going to be putting a screw through the band clamp into the base of the bow. We're going to be using this self-drilling screw to drill a hole, and then Once we get that hole drilled through, we're going to take this stubby screw that's provided in your kit, and we are going to run that through here, securing the band clamp to the base of the bow. The reason for the stubby screw is that first 12 inches of the base of your bow here, you have the rebar on the inside, so you would have interference trying to drive the longer screw through. To finish installing the earth lock anchor plate, we're going to be driving our diagonal rebar. There's 2 oval holes in the anchor plate, and we're going to be driving the rebar about a 45-degree angle through those oval holes like that. They'll be crossing in the ground, and this secures the tunnel down significantly. For perspective, we did some testing on this, and we can pull a single piece of rebar out of the ground with just under 400 pounds of lifting force. With the earth lock system, it takes about 1,400 pounds of force to pull this out of the ground once it's all installed. So it's a significant improvement to the strength of your tunnel and securing it against wind shear forces. You want to drive the rebar until there's about 3 inches sticking out above the plate. If you drive it in too far, you could risk the plate just lifting up off the rebar. Once you have it completed like this, you're going to repeat the same process on the other 3 corners of your tunnel. At this point in your tunnel installation, you want to think about what you're doing for your end walls. So if you're doing any of our framed end walls, like a Dutch door or a DIY end wall, or the framed double zipper end wall, now would be the time to do that framing, because you're going to have to put more band clamps to attach your end wall framing to it. And it's better to do that now before we move on to the single channel step. So just keep that in mind. But the next step that we're doing now is the single channel. So we're going to be starting at the ground level here. So we're bringing this channel all the way down to the ground. And the first 2 screws in this channel, we're going to be doing the little stubby screws because of the interference with the rebar inside of the bow. So we're going to be using a regular self-drilling screw to drill that hole, and then we will be putting the stubby screw through. The rest of the way over the bow, we're going to be using our regular self-tapping screws, and we're going to be bending the single channel over the contour of the bow as we go and placing a screw every 12 to 16 inches. The channel can be a little bit of a tricky process to hold it and put the screws in all at the same time. So one thing that can come in handy is a squeeze clamp like this, especially when you get to the last section like here. So you can take the clamp and put it over the bow and the single channel and just tighten it up. Saves you having to try to hold it while you're also putting in a screw. Now on the last section of single channel, you're gonna need to do a cut. So what we recommend is putting it down at the base of the bow here, and then rolling this around to find that location where you need to cut. Once you get that measurement and have your channel marked, there's a lot of different ways that you can cut this, but one fairly easy way is if you have a good set of tin snips, you can cut the side of the channel on both sides. Once you've cut through the sides of the channel, you can just bend it like that and break it. This is a soft aluminum channel, so you can cut it with a lot of different things. If you have a Sawzall with a metal cutting blade or a hacksaw, that will work great as well. Now we're going to come up here and we're going to continue attaching this down, bending it as we go. And then the last 2 screws are going to be those stubby self-tapping screws. And then you'll repeat the same process on the other end of the tunnel. The next step is to install the plastic. We're going to roll our plastic down the length of the tunnel, and we want to make sure that we have about 2 or 3 feet past the end bow on both ends of the tunnel. So if we need to cut it, you can do that. Now it's time to put the plastic over the tunnel and start to secure it. First of all, you want to make sure that you have the orientation correct. So there is printing on one side of the plastic that says inside. There's a couple characters that you can use to orient yourself. So that needs to be facing down towards the inside of the tunnel. This is a short tunnel, so we're gonna be able to do this pretty easily with one person on either end and just pull it over using our ladders as we climb up over the peak. But if you're doing a longer tunnel, you'll wanna use some rope, 2 or 3 different places down the length of the tunnel. And if you have some tennis balls, that works really great to put the tennis ball on the back side of the plastic, kind of bunch it up around it, tie a rope around, use the rope to pull the plastic over the tunnel. And depending on the length of your tunnel, you may need 2 or 3 or 4 people helping out to get the plastic on. Definitely try to do this at a time of day when there's not much wind, or ideally no wind. So that tends to be earlier in the morning or maybe late in the evening. Are great times to install plastic. So it's a little windy right now. We're gonna give it a shot and see how it goes. Once you get the plastic over the tunnel, you want to look for some orientation lines to center it. Make sure you have the equal amount of plastic on either side of the tunnel. And then you're going to start doing the spring wire from the peak, going down on one side and then working your way back down to the bottom on the other side. And you're going to be trying to pull the creases out as you go. This is a Caterpillar tunnel, so we have ropes going after this to really tighten and secure the plastic. So we don't need to worry about getting it super tight, but we do want to try to get all the wrinkles out as much as possible. And we'll just keep working our way down. You can see that the wind about got the best of us there, so definitely do not try this when it's really windy on a larger tunnel. Doesn't matter how many people you have. If your wind picks up on a 100-foot tunnel, it's going to get away from you. So you don't want to lose your plastic. Next, we're going to trim the excess plastic along the sides of your tunnel. Depending on how much extra you have, you may want to trim off a little bit because you don't want to have too much bunched up. I would say 6 or 8 inches, just in case you want to sandbag it along the sides, would be helpful. But a couple feet, you're probably going to want to trim off a little bit. This one, we don't have a whole lot extra, and that depends on the width of your tunnel and whether you have the lift kit extensions, stuff like that. So we're just going to be trimming the ends of our plastic here, and we want to leave 2 or 3 inches out past the bow. We're just going to trim it all the way over this end and then repeat on the other side, same process. The next step is to install the rope to secure the plastic down. I have our spool of rope set up on my ladder here, and we're going to go down to the far end of the tunnel. And we're going to start by tying a loop in the end of our rope. Just a typical bite. We're going to take the loop and we're going to feed it down in between the 2 loops of the easy clip, and then rotate it and come back through. We want the loop to be over both loops of the easy clip. Now we're going to come back to our second bow here. We're going to spool up some rope and throw it over the tunnel, and it will be secured on the easy clip on the other side at the second bow. Now we're going to come back down to the third bow and both down through the middle of the easy clip and then loop it back around both loops. So what we have is a V shape going over and back over the tunnel. Now we're going to take this tail of the rope and we're going to reach up about as far as we can comfortably reach up the tunnel. And then we're going to be cutting the rope right here. The best way to do this and keeping it from fraying really bad is to take a torch or a lighter and just melt the outside of the rope a little bit, and then take your utility knife and cut it right on that part that you've melted, and that keeps it from fraying badly as soon as you cut it, and we can just melt it a little bit more on the end. We're going to pull the rope just a little bit tight. We don't want to have slack on the other side of the tunnel, and then we're going to reach up here about shoulder height. You're going to run the rope over the back side of your hand, and then you're going to reach around and get a loop like that. And then we're going to grab the bottom side of this rope and pull it back through that loop, creating this truckered hitch type knot there. Now we're going to grab our tail and we're going to bring this up and go through the loop. And then that gives us some great advantage there to be pulling nice and tight. So we're going to pull this down, get that plastic nice and snug, just go around the load line here and back through with a loop. And that's basically a slip knot, so you can pull that out and tighten it up some more if you need to. And then to make sure that it doesn't pull out like this when you don't want it to and loosen up, what we recommend is taking the tail end of the rope and going back through that loop so that it doesn't come out. And when you need to tighten up your plastic, you just pull that through and loosen this up. Now, if this knot ends up getting down too close to the ground so you can't tighten it up anymore, that also can be pulled out just by pulling on the rope like that. And then you just have to go up a little bit higher and tie that knot. Now we're going to repeat the same process of making that V shape over the tunnel from this bow across and then back. And the only thing different here is that we already have this loop through the easy clip, and so it makes it a little bit trickier to get the next loop on. But we'll tie that loop, and then what you have to do is put the loop through here around one side of the easy clip and then back through the front around the other side, and then you end up with that loop. Again, we want to make sure we're over both sides of the easy clip. Now you'll repeat the same process going down the length of your tunnel, and then you'll do the same thing on the other side. And that completes the installation process of the Farmer's Friend Gothic and Gothic Pro Caterpillar tunnels. If you have any questions, feel free to give us a call or go to our website, farmersfriend.com, and click the support button at the top of the page. Until next time, happy growing.